Joanna, I think you're the first American TA I've had.
Oh, really? Well, I will be in, I'm just doing check-in, so I'll only be there
Okay.
for the first 5 minutes. But,
Okay, that's fine.
but glad to be the first.
Oh, I know, right? And that's not a complaint by any means. Everyone has been so helpful. I've really, really appreciated the support of any TA that I've had check in, or someone who stayed with me the full time.
Right. That's good.
It's just helpful.
Yeah. All right. I'm so excited to see all the new crafting classes on the I love it. I usually have a crochet project next to me, and I don't right now, but
What do you like to crochet?
everything.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure I'm having a lot of fun with this. My children, I have 8 grown kids, and I make stuff mostly for my family or for gifts for friends, and they came, Mom, you need to have an Etsy shop. Mom, you need to have an Etsy shop. And I keep saying, I feel like that would not, I don't want to mass produce. I want to make things for people that appreciate it and love it, right?
Right.
And so this, though, being able to teach it to other people, this really fills a niche for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is a real nice application.
I started an Etsy store just to offload all my projects that weren't like, it was just patterns I wanted to try out or whatever.
I just love.
Yeah. But I haven't made any sales yet. So don't know if it's worth it.
So I missed part of what you said. Did you say you started one to sell patterns?
To sell like all the stuff that I have just amassed over the years from like trying different patterns or like just not having, yeah.
And yeah. So I think maybe because I've got so many kids, I think I've given away more than I've kept. But that's okay. So, am I freezing? Am I freezing for you at all?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. I don't know if it's me or you.
So on Sundays, I am in a bedroom. Normally, I'm in my living room right next to my wireless router, and I'm in a bedroom right now because we have company on Sundays usually, and I'm a little farther away from the router. Do you think that could make a difference?
Yeah, it probably.
You think it could? Okay, that.
Wonder. Yeah, need to get a booster or something.
So this is it's new Wi-Fi for us, and before, up until this point, we did not have high speed Wi-Fi even available to us.
Oh.
I'm in a rural area, and I have zero trouble with it in the living room. But because I have company on Sundays, I can't really do it I may have to not teach on Sundays. Is maybe what's going to happen because. I noticed the freezing when I did it the last time too. Okay, I'm seeing 12:31 and no here.
Uh-oh. Let's see. Well, we're live, so we got that going for us.
There's only, I think, 7 people registered for the class.
Okay. Hmm. Well, in that case, I'm going to jump out and try to jump back in and just make sure that I can.
Okay.
So
Do you want me to make myself host again?
I think you are. You should be. Yeah, you're host again. So
Okay.
I'll be back.
Okay. Can you see I shared my screen while you're out. Can you see that?
Yes, yeah. I love all the thread. Makes me want to go find my stash. I had to stop counting cross stitch because the lighting in my house is so terrible.
So when I learned how to cross, I didn't wear glasses. And when I hit 40, I started wearing glasses. Well, now I'm 60 now, and I decided a couple years ago to make counter cross stitch ornaments for each of my kids for Christmas. And now my kids also, it's extended family and grandkids and in-laws, and so I had to make about 20 of these little ornaments, and I couldn't do it, and I ended up buying a magnifying light.
Oh yeah.
So it's in my lap, and I can cross stitch under the light and the magnifier, and it's made all the difference.
Yeah. My mom has one of those that I may have to borrow it and see if it's worth.
Yeah, to me, it was definitely worth it. So Joanna, I haven't had a situation yet where I've had no attendees. Has that ever happened?
I don't know. I don't know. I'm gonna text Melissa and see what she says. Let's see. Oops. I mean, you are. Yeah, you are live, so you could just teach it as you would.
Just pretend?
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to do that. So you can see my shared screen, right?
Yes.
So you'd rather have me do that than live stream somebody else, correct?
Yeah, because I don't think anybody else is happening right now. So.
Oh. All right. Well, I'd like to welcome everyone to Get Set Up's class on Introduction to Counter Cross Stitch. I'm happy to be here and introducing this wonderful craft to all of you. My name is Sarah, and I'll be your guide today. I live in Everett, Michigan, which is right in the very center of the Lower Peninsula of Michigan. I have spent 22 years in K-12 education, and I retired last summer during COVID, my position as an elementary principal. During my career, I spent 2 years as a specialist in the Office of K-12 Outreach with Michigan State University. My job was to help schools that had fallen behind academically, and I worked all over Northern Michigan and certainly loved and enjoyed my time with MSU. I believe that in quotes, I love quotes, they help guide my life. And one of my favorites is this one, and that's that people do the best they can with what they know. And when they know better, they do better. That quote is also harmonious with Get Set Up's plan to reach older learners. What I like about this quote is it says, as long as I'm alive, I can be learning new skills. And I love that. I love it that I can do that. And obviously, Get Set Up must feel the same way because they've tried to line up a variety of classes that would appeal to older learners. And so I'm happy to be with you and share that with you today. Get Set Up helps you learn, like you and me. So I learn from you, you learn from me. I'm sure there are those of you that will be able to share tips that can help us all learn more about counted cross stitch. Ideally, I can see you and your camera is on, but if it's not, that's okay, I understand. Know that you can request a recording after class by emailing help@getsetup.io. That way, if you are participating in the counted cross stitch class and you're wondering how I did something and you can't recall it afterwards, if you've got that recording, you can watch it over and over again, or you can watch a specific part of it again, which is a nice way to catch something that you might need to just brush up on a little bit. If you're joining the live stream, I'd like to welcome you today. But just know the best way to participate is to go hop on over to the getsetup.io website and register directly for a class. That allows you to be interactive with me, ask questions on the spot. And it also is the thing that allows you to get a recording, because if you're not in the class, you cannot request a recording of the class. So if you ever think that that's something that you might want, you're going to want to register for a class. Get Set Up is not paid to promote a specific product. And neither am I. So in the course of our crafting together, I'm going to mention things that are my favorite crafts. That's just, I can't teach crafts and not tell you about my favorite products, but just know that I am not endorsed by anyone, nor is Get Set Up to endorse any specific product whatsoever. Please feel free to ask questions either by unmuting yourself or by typing your questions in the chat bar, or then I'll answer your questions any way that I possibly can while we're here together. So hopefully you've joined me today to learn some of these things about counted cross stitch. So perhaps you're wondering, what exactly is counted cross stitch? Or maybe you know what counted cross stitch is and you're wondering, well, what supplies might I need to be able to do counted cross stitch? Or what are the steps to completing a counted cross stitch project? You may be wondering, well, what are some resources for kids to find the materials to make your own project? And I'm hoping that while we're together today, we'll be covering all of those things. So I'm wondering, if you're a learner here with me today, what is one thing that you're hoping to learn about counted cross stitch? And I'll just give you a minute of wait time while I wait for your response. So maybe you're wondering, what is counted cross stitch exactly? And this is so really a form of embroidery. It uses mainly cross stitches or X stitches. So you can describe the stitches as either crosses or X's. And there are a few other stitches in counted cross stitch. That you can have a back stitch and you can use a French knot. However, we won't be covering those extra stitches today. This picture that you can see right here on the right is a picture, it's based on the Hummel line, and it's a picture I made. You can see I sent down here using back stitches that I made this in 1982. And I put it on the sticky board to mount it. And today, 40 years later, you can't tell that it was made 40 years ago because the colors are still vibrant. The stitching is still secure, and it, you know, it's as lovely today as the day that I put my last stitch in it. So it's exciting to me to have a project and a craft that stands the test of time. Two ways really to go about starting a counted cross stitch project. One is you can choose a pattern and then go find your supplies. Or two, you can choose a pre-packaged kit, and we'll be talking about both of those today. So when we get done, you could, if you just decide once we're finished that you would like to make something, you can decide which way you want to go about this. So this little picture on the right is the project that we're going to be completing in the course of the class today. It's just a little heart, and I picked it because of its simplicity. It's a free pattern that I was able to find online, and I'm going to send you that in the email notes afterwards, so that if you want to try this exact project, you can have the pattern to work from yourself. But you need your pattern, you need your fabric, and counted cross stitch fabric. Generally, the most common counted cross stitch fabric is Aida cloth, but you can also use linen, you can use waste cloth, you can use gingham. Actually, I actually completed a baby quilt one time, cross stitching on top of 1/4 inch gingham, and it turned out lovely. You need a cross stitch needle, which is different than a sewing needle in that it has a blunt tip, not a sharp tip, and that keeps it so that when you're finding your holes from underneath, it keeps it from getting caught in the fabric. You'll need floss, which is the common name for the thread that's used to complete a cross stitch project. My favorite brand is DMC there. If you're going to do a bigger project, this was a very small one and I actually didn't hoop it, but if you're going to do a bigger project, you'd want to hoop it with an embroidery hoop. Masking tape or painter's masking tape or Scotch tape to protect the edges of your fabric. You're going to want a pair of scissors, and optionally you may want a magnifying glass, and you may want to use a magnet board and a magnet to track where you are in your pattern. Here are some examples of some of the supplies want to use. So these are examples of the supplies that I was just sharing in the previous screen. So up here on the upper right are some sample needles, and those they're still a sewing size needle. As I said, the big difference in those is that they're blunt tipped. Now these are some that I got, and this happens to be a DMC brand, but they come in many different brands. And you can see it's sold as a counted cross stitch needle. These come in various sizes from size 18 to 22, average size when I am cross stitching. And I got this package, although if you get a kit, your needle primarily is already going to be provided in your kit. This is the common way that you'll find embroidery floss sold, and we call these skeins. And on the skein, on one end, they're wrapped with these little paper wraps, and on one end it tells you the brand. So in this case, it's DMC thread, and on the other code, but it has the number of the color, not the name, but the number of the color, and that's how you're going to find the colors you need to complete a project. DMC has what they call standardized numbers, and you can find the colors that you need to complete a project by choosing colors with that number already on it. Now, when I buy it, I don't like to store it this way because I feel like my thread could easily get tangled up. So what I do is I bring it home in my storage case. So this one of the cases shut. This is a case open. It used to be sold with this DMC color chart in it. Now I looked recently, and in Walmart, they still sell these boxes. They still sell the cardboard bobbins. These boxes that you see right here are actually about 40 years old as well. But what I do is I take my thread and I put the number. So I take the number that's on here and I hand write it on the cardboard between the two slits that hold the thread, and then I wind my thread onto I have these boxes, and I store my thread numerically in order. That has been very helpful over the years for quickly finding numbers of threads that I may need, or finding out that, hey, I don't have that color already, so I'm going to have to purchase it for a project. But keeping it numerically ordered like this is very helpful. This is an example of an embroidery hoop. And as I said, if you're doing a bigger project, you're going to want an embroidery hoop. This happens to be a plastic hoop insert. Also commonly, you'll find them that are wooden with a screw on the side to tighten it down. That would be my preferred embroidery hoop. I don't care for this as much, but that's definitely a personal preference. In the lower right, here are some pictures of different kinds of cloth, and this is just what I had in my stash, but you'll note that it's different colors, and it does come in a variety of colors in the stores. And then finally, over here on the left, this is a mount. I'm going to frame something when you get done. I think the mounting board is the best way to go, because what happens is it's a stiff like poster board that is sticky on one side. So you peel the paper off, it reveals the sticky surface, and then you can take your finished project and put it down on that mounting board, and it's going to hold everything secure over time. So that's the getting a mounting board. You can also make your project bigger than you want it and tape to a piece of cardboard to put inside of a frame. But I just love the mounting board and the way it keeps the whole project secure. Here's some examples of some magnifying type devices, lights. You can get these as lights. Like this is the one that's similar to the one I own. I put this part of the light under the edge of my chair when I'm working on it. This is a flexible arm. And so literally what I do is I pull that light and magnifier over my lap, and I cross stitch under the magnifier. And now that I'm older and my eyesight is not as good as it was when I was younger, this has been a game changer for me in continuing my love for counted cross stitch. This is another style that you can get of magnifying glass. It fits on the neck and rests right above your work. I've never tried this particular style. It's a style that looks like almost like a miner's hat, and the magnifier and light hang out over your eyes. That to me seems like it would be the least comfortable of the three options, but certainly it's worth giving a try if you have given up on this or are afraid to begin this craft, this hobby, because of eyesight. So let's talk for a few minutes about the pattern. So as I said earlier, this is the pattern that we're going to use today, and found it online. And there's lots of free options out there. I'm going to send you the link to this. Also, the DMC website itself certainly has a number of free patterns on it that you can use. But I liked this one because it was very simple, very straightforward, and allowed me to teach you some basics of counted cross stitch. So what you see on the far left, is this, and you can see that the pattern is the size of an 8.5 by 11 sheet, so much larger than the finished project. If I was working on a very large project, this might actually be very, very tiny. So I like this one because it's real easy to illustrate what we're talking about today. Now, the first thing I do when I download a pattern and print it, is I do this. So I make a vertical line and I make a horizontal line so I know where my center is. Now, you might be wondering, how do I figure out where that center is? Well, you can see right here, a row of numbers across the top, and there's a column of numbers down the side. And I did a close-up of this edge of this pattern over here on the right. And you can see that between line 15 and 16, there's an arrow. Across the top, where these numbers are, there's also an arrow. So that tells me on the top and the bottom where my vertical line is, and it tells me on the left and the right where my horizontal line is. And I find that that makes a great anchoring point for counting later on. Now, I bought in a book, or if it comes in a kit, sometimes I'll make a copy of it on a copier and do the same thing because I don't want to write directly on my pattern that I'm going to be storing. I have like what I call my working pattern, like this one, and then I have my permanent pattern, which I put in my patterns. So now let's take a closer look at this middle area of this pattern, which is right here. And there's a couple things that you'll notice. One is you'll notice that this pattern uses 4 different colors of threads. And in a color pattern, it's represented, each color presented separately, and it's represented in 2 ways. It's represented both by the color and by the icon or the symbol that's in the center of the color. So in this case, what it's telling us is if we're going to go to the store and buy this thread, that we're going to buy a skein of 3326, and that color is going to be used anywhere you see that symbol. We're going to buy 554, and that's going to be a purple, and it's going to be used anywhere you see that symbol. This color, I'm going to call that green for the rest of this class. And then this 472 with the wiggly equal sign in it is 472. I'm going to call that olive. So we've got pink, purple, green, and olive. And those, as you can see, guide us in where we put our stitches in the pattern. If you're wondering, how could you track rows? There's a couple different ways. This is one way that I've done it, where as I finish a row, I highlight it. I've also taken a pencil and just drawn a light line through the stitches that I've completed. If I were going to choose between these 2 methods, I prefer the pencil over the marker, because if I highlight a wrong line by accident in a more complicated pattern, I can't erase it. So I do like the pencil, although the highlighter is certainly easier to see. But this really is my favorite method. And this is a magnifying, a metal board with magnifying strips on it, magnetic strips on it. And I don't have this. This is also a magnetic tube, which also happens to magnify, and it's got a red line in it. So if you use this tube on your metal sheet, you can put it exactly under the line you're working on, and it magnifies that line, which is a real nice feature. What I do is I don't use this. I use a long magnet strip, and I follow my lines with my long magnet strip. Well, for me, a strategy that I've landed on that makes me quite happy. So let's talk about the cloth for a minute. So the most common kind of cloth is called Aida cloth, and most places that carry counter cross stitch supplies are going to carry Aida cloth. As I said earlier, there's quite a variety of cloths that you can use it on, all the way from something as large as what they call monk cloth. You can use it on gingham. As I said, there's many types of fabric, but if you're going to go to a counter cross stitch section, Aida is the most common one that you're going to see. So there's common sizes of cloth, and so you can see here that I've said the 11 count is the easiest to see. 14 count is the most popular. 18 count is getting even smaller, and so if you're having trouble with your eyes, you may not want to choose an 18 count fabric. So what does that mean exactly? 11 count. Well, what that means, if you had a ruler and you put a 1 inch mark along here, that if it's 11 count, there would be 11 of those squares vertically, and there would be 11 of those squares horizontally in 1 inch. If it was 14 count and you laid your ruler down, there would be 14 squares down, 14 squares across. 18 count would be 18 in that same square, same with 22 count. So you can see the bigger the number is, the taller there's going to be. So if you're just starting out and you wonder if your eyes can do it, I would recommend 11 count, although it is a little tiny bit harder to find these days. And you can see the reason Aida cloth is so popular is you can see that there's a grid, and where these 4 corners are, that's what we're going to be using primarily to put our stitches in. And so now we've got our fabric. How are we going to prepare our fabric? So rule of thumb would be an inch wider on each side of the fabric, that much bigger than the surface area of the pattern itself, at least 1 inch bigger, because you're going to be taping down your edges to keep it from fraying. Or if you already know, for example, you're going to frame it in an 8x10 frame and the pattern fits on an 8x10 surface, you're going to want to cut it bigger. So at least 9 by 12, or maybe even 10 by 13, and because you're going to trim it down when you get done to make sure you've got a nice smooth edge. If you're going to make it into a bookmark, obviously you're going to cut your fabric to the size of your bookmark, or maybe a little bit more, so you can trim that down as well. So this is what that looks like. So this is how I prep my fabric. So what you're seeing here is you're seeing the square that I'm going to use to make my heart. And I prepped the edges. Tape. This tape, I believe, was 1 inch wide to start with. So I put it in half over the edges. So half on the front and half of the tape on the back to protect this top edge. And I did that on all 4 sides. And then once you get and that stops it from fraying, and you can use, like I said, a variety of tapes. What I have found with the Scotch tape is it doesn't necessarily take the test of time. So the project, you may wear the tape out before you get your project finished. The painter's tape tends to stick until the end. Masking tape is fine too, although it's a little bit harder to remove. Excuse me. It's a little bit harder to remove, so I do favor the painter's tape, but whatever you have, it will be fine. So then what you do is you find your center. So I took the fabric and I folded it in half along one straight column of holes. So I folded it in half, and if you say, oh, but exactly in half is in the middle of the column, then pick one side or the other and go with it. If it's that distance is less than 1/8 of an inch, it's not going to hurt anything if you're slightly off, but you don't want to be way off. And so I do it vertically and I do it horizontally, as I've done over here. And then once I've got my fold in, I take a piece of sewing thread, and I use sewing thread because I only want one strand of it. And I use what they call a running stitch. So I secure it, I thread my needle like this, I secure it on one end, and I do a running stitch the length of that fold. And I take big long stitches in and out, in and out, in and out, going in a straight line. What I do try to do is make sure on my side, which I choose to be the front, because it's the same on both sides. So I choose one side to be the front, and I try to do one of my long stitches over where the middle is going to be. And when I'm doing the horizontal line, I try to make sure one of my long stitches is over my vertical line so that I get this nice X or cross in the middle to help me determine my count later on. So I secure it up here when I start, I secure it down here when I get done, and I cut it off. Now, having said that, going back to my red thread, I choose a color that's not in my finished project, and I do that on purpose so that I can easily see it to remove it. Now, once you've got all those cross stitches in there, can you still remove it? Yes, you can. I've never had it where I can't get the thread out, but sometimes you do have to work it out a little bit with the pin or with your needle, which is why you may want to use a different color. That helps me in seeing what I'm actually removing. This shows you that I'm all ready to cross stitch right here, but my smallest hoop that I own is bigger than this size fabric. And so I opted, because it's such a small project, not to hoop it at all. What the hooping does is it slightly stretches the fabric, which opens those holes up just a little tiny bit, makes it a little bit easier to use. It gives you a handle to hold on to, and it helps keep your tension nice. So those are reasons to hoop if you've got that as an option. These are the colors, as you can see. Here's the 5 for this one. Here's the 3326 that's right here. And you can see what I've done here is I've swapped it out for these darker colors. And what happened when I got these out and started working on them was I did not like the way they showed up on the white fabric as a demonstration. I wanted the colors to be nice and deep, so it was easy for the learner to see the colors on the white background. And so I swapped them out. Now, the one thing that I would have been helpful is what I normally do it, because there's only 4 colors, but let's say I had 20 colors. What I would do is I would cross out 3326 and handwrite in 602 right on my pattern, on my working pattern, so that I would remember what color I'm using for what spots. And as I said, that's not as important in a small project, but in a big one it is. So I would cross this out, put 602, I would cross this out, put 806, I would cross this out, put 701, and I would cross this out and put 704. And that way I could much more easily track which colors I'm putting in which spots. And again, how I take the skeins, and this is a close-up view of, these are called cardboard bobbins. How I take it and wind it on the bottom for a bobbin for storage. So we're almost ready to put our first stitch in. It's getting exciting at this point. And so how do you choose where to start? Do you start in that upper left hand? Where do you start exactly? Well, what I like to do is I like to choose stitches that are as close to the center mark of pattern as I can get, because to me that marks, that becomes a reference point. That center most number of stitches becomes my my reference to where I put a lot of the rest of the X's. So I pick what's within there. And then I cut my floss to between 12 and 18 inches long. If you go any shorter than 12 inches, you're changing your thread too often and it becomes irritating. If you do it any longer, your thread actually, believe it or not, can wear as it's going on the fabric. And I've actually worn color off. I've frayed my thread so that it looks fuzzy. It's worth changing the thread if you make your thread 18 inches long. So I recommend not longer than that. And then when you buy it in the skein like that, when you buy it in this skein, it's actually, and I know you can't see it very well right here, but this is actually 6 strands in this end. And that's what I'm showing you in this picture right here, is that one strand of thread as it comes off of the skein is actually 6 separate strands. And if you're working on 14-inch Aida, you only use 2 of those strands. So once you get it cut to 18 inches long, you're going to peel off 2 of the strands and save 4 for the next, for when you need it next. So you're going to peel off 2, and then when you get done with those 2, you're going to go back and peel off 2 more, and then go back, you're going to peel 2 more. And if you use all of that up, then you're going to cut another 18 inches. But you're only going to use 2 of the 6 strands at a time if you're on Aida 14. Now, if you're on Aida 11, you're going to use 3 strands. So you would get 2 strands, 2 sections of 3 strands that are 18 inches long for Aida 11. If you were using 18, you might use 1, you might use 2. You're going to look at your pattern to see what they're recommending. But is if you're going to use 2, and if it's, I'm sorry, if it's Aida 14, you're going to use 2, and if it's Aida 11, you're going to use 3. So this is not the pattern itself. This just is going to give you the foundation knowledge for making the stitches. So this is just a random piece of Aida fabric, and I've used actually computer images to show you what happens. So what I choose to do when I'm making an X is I choose to come up in the lower left-hand corner. So I come up in the lower left, I go down on the lower right, then I'm just going to show you what I do to the right first. So I come up in the lower left, go down the upper right. If I'm doing a whole row of stitches, in this case 5, I'm going to do all of my right hands before I ever do my left hands. So if you've never cross stitched before, you might think, well, probably, surely you would make each X individually. It actually does not look nearly as consistent if you make the X's individual as it does if you do your whole row one direction first and then return one direction going back. Now, I choose to come up in this lower left and go down in the upper right. That doesn't matter as much as that whatever you do consistently. So perhaps you want to make your X's by coming up here first and going down here. It's okay. You can do it that way. Just whatever way you do it consistently all the time that way. So I come up in the lower left, go down in the upper right. If I'm doing 5, I do all of my 5s to the right before I return. Let's show you my return. So I did this. You can see in the blue, that's my slant to the right. Now I'm going to come up in the lower right-hand corner and go down in the upper left-hand corner for 1 X. But if I'm doing 5 X's, I'm going to come up here, down here, up here, down here, up here, down here, up here, down here, up here, down here. And I would do that to complete all 5 X's in the row. Oops, excuse me. So now to the pattern that we're making today. So I chose this green area. I could have chosen the purple, but the reason I chose the green is because this X is the closest to the center. This X in this section is closer to the center than this X would be. If I was going to start with this section, I would start here and work my way down. So this was actually the closest to the center. Now, having said that, I will tell you that some people that cross stitch will be important to start, if you're working on white, that you would start with your lightest color and work towards your darkest color, because when you carry thread behind, we'll be talking about that in a minute, but when you carry thread behind, if it's a dark colored thread, it can actually show on the front, and you don't want that. So one of the ways that you can avoid that is working your pattern from lightest color of thread to darkest color. Now it would be the reverse of that if you were working on a navy piece of Aida, for example, using white, then you would work from your darkest color to your lightest color. But even when I do that, even when I follow that order, I still would put this green in first because I like it as a reference point. So normally I don't write on my patterns like this. I did it so that you could see my thinking as well as hear it. So what I know about this row, or over here if you want to look closer, what I know about this row is that it has 15 X's in it, and I'm going to be making 15 X's. I know that I want to start here and work to the right, and then start here and work to the left to complete that first row. And to decide how to get there, I start at remember I start in that lower left-hand corner. So I'm going to start at my center point, which matches my center point right here. And I go down 1, because I'm going to start in this lower left-hand corner. So I go down 1, so that's my first count, down 1, and to the left 8, and that gets me to that spot. So if I did it over here, it's down 1, back 8, gets me to the beginning of that row. Let's apply that. 8 looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I come up here and down here to complete my first stitch. And then this shows how I came back up here and down here to complete my second stitch. I'm on my way to doing all of my right hand slants in this first row of green 15 X's. And what do you do on the back? So just no nuts on the back of your fabric. Well, then what do you do? And that's what this is showing on this picture. So what I do is on the back side, so this is the back side of my fabric, I hold down about 1 inch of thread. I don't let that come through when I pulled my thread up for the first time. I hold it in place with my pointer finger, my index finger on my left hand. I hold it in place and I actually stitch around it. So as I'm making my slants to the right, I get to the back, I'm trying to catch it between the top and the bottom of that stitch so that it lays flat. This is especially important when you're framing it because you don't want bumps all over your frame. So laying it flat like this is important. When I finish a section, when I get close to the end of my 18 inches, I take my needle and I run it back through under my stitches. And that's a lot easier to do than trying to catch it when you're making your first row. But that's how you can knot the back of your fabric. So here's showing you all of my stitches to the right, and then I'm going to come up here on the lower right hand side, and I'm going to go to the upper left hand side down in here to start my stitches to the left. And then that shows you that completed first row. When I've completed that first row, my next row is indented by 1 stitch. So I know to start that I'm going to go down 1 and over 1 and bring my needle up right there to complete the second row of 13 X's. Here's a close-up of ending that row, that piece of thread. So I'm getting close to the end. I can't keep going and have enough to weave it in at the end. So I take my needle, I run it under there, pull it out, and you want to run under at least 5 stitches or up to 1 inch, and then trim it off. So in the counted cross stitch world, they say that your back should be as neat as your front. I've never achieved that, although I will say I got closer than I've ever gotten before with this particular one because I was being very careful to start and end within my colors. So now I'm going to show you, this is moving on to the second section. So I finished this first green section. So it was 15 rows, 13 rows, sorry, 15 X's, 13 X's, 13 X's, 11 X's to finish the dark green. Now we're ready to do this olive green section, which is still, again, it's only in 1 and over 1. But I did 1 and over 1 to start right there. And I think it's 9 now in this row. So I did my 9 to the right, did my 9 to the left, went down 1 over 1. And this is showing you now what it's beginning to look like as I'm weaving in my ends. Now I got to the bottom of this green section. There's only 3 X's. And remember I said you should run it under at least 5. So instead of going under these 4 vertical lines, I chose to go up 1 row and wind my thread under to make sure I had a good secure hold of my cross stitch project. This is showing going up to start the purple section. So this is where you can do it a couple different ways. I could start from, remember if I had this that I was working from, I could start from this point and I could go up and count back. But if I know I'm correct in this section, if I know I've completed this section correctly, I can count from here, which is what I did. And I put on the front and I went up 3, 1, 2, 3, and back 1. It's good to be comparing your work to both the lines that you've put in and the sections in your pattern. So like I might count this row, do my pattern down here, and then not count again because I know I'm only going in 1 and I'm ending 1 early. I might not count again until I get here, but I'm going to count quite frequently to see where I'm at, still on track with my pattern. There's nothing worse than getting one X off up here and then having, having my heart end down here, which would be a tragedy, right? To put in all that work and not have things in the right place. They have to rip it out or etc. So this shows you that I went up 3, back 1, completed that whole row of purple before I went back the other way. What I wanted to show you on this picture is that I actually ran out of thread, or started running out of thread halfway through a row. And so what I did was I flipped it over right there, wound my needle under those stitches, cut it off, and I started the same way. I instead of holding my thread on the back, now that I'm in this purple section, I've got some stitches on my fabric, I just took my needle, my new needle with a new 18-inch piece on it, and went under here and began where I left off. So you don't have to be at the end of a row to change the color, to change your thread to finish a section. And that shows you the completed purple section. This is beginning the pink section. Now I'm counting up to begin the pink section. And what I want to show you here is carrying the thread on the back. So because this is so small, I could have chosen to do this section first and then this section, but I wanted to show you carrying the thread. And so I opted to carry it. And so what I did was I did 4 of my X's to the right, and then underneath, I counted behind 5 stitches, which is how many X's, how many boxes are open. I count 5 under, and I started that, and I did those 4 stitches to the right. Then I brought it up here and did these 4, carried it behind, and completed the 4 that are here. And that gives you this on the back side. Now, rule of thumb is don't carry more than an inch, because it really can show through. And I'm going to show you an example of that when I get done. So that's how you carry your thread behind when you're going from one section to another. This is showing you my completed project. This, now in this picture, this is a real good example of where the fabric frays. That's why we put the tape on it. It's so loosely woven so that you can, have the visual of the grid, that it can fray easily. That's why we tape it. And then I took my scissors, cut it off real close to where I had knotted it. I worked my knot out with the needle. I worked my thread out with the needle. If it's really stuck in the pattern, I might cut it off right here and continue working it out with my needle, but you remove all the tape and all the thread when you get the finished project. So these are some of the tips and tricks. Cut your thread 18 inches or less. Know that longer thread frays and knots more easily. Carry the thread behind your work 1 inch or less. I already mentioned dark thread carried behind white cloth can be visible from the front and vice versa. If the thread starts to feel twisted when you're working and it starts to knot more, you can just take your project and put it front side, you put it horizontal with your front side facing, let your needle dangle, and it will actually untwist the thread, which can be quite helpful. And remember that tension is important and consistency is key. So this is a video on removing the knot, and this was a great help for me when I got started. And this is showing you that there's a knot right here. And this kind of knot is actually quite frequent in the cross stitch world, this loop like this with the knot at the bottom. So I stick my needle through the loop, I pull softly up on it until the knot is around me, not real tight. You don't want it real tight. Then you remove the needle, pull the thread, and that knot pops right out. And I would say at least 9 times out of 10, that's an effective way of removing a knot. I used to, before I knew that trick, I used to cut it off and rethread. Well, that can happen fairly frequently, especially as the thread nears the end, and it was quite frustrating. So learning this little technique was certainly very helpful. This is is the most recent project that I completed myself. My son, who has a home in North Carolina, said, "Mom, I want this for my bathroom." And he has it framed and proudly mounted in his bathroom in his home. But here's an example. I don't know if you're able to see it, but I sure know it's there. This color gray that's right here in the helicopter is over here in Godzilla. And I got lazy and I carried it behind, and I can see that thread. I wish that I had taken it to cut it and start over again because it bothers me that that line is there. One of the things that you notice about Godzilla is there's a lot of color changes. There's not a lot of straight rows of solid colors. So from that perspective, it was a little bit more challenging. The back, it was difficult to make the back of this look very neat. However, I did mount it on the mounting board and it looks nice, and I think it will be fine for years to come. So we've learned what counter cross stitch is. We've learned what supplies are needed for a project. We've learned, and we know some resources for purchasing kits and supplies. I will show you, I do have a couple of prepackaged kits if you're wondering what to do about that. So this is an example of one that's on dark cloth. It came with everything that you need to complete the project, with including the needle. What it doesn't include is scissors, and this one doesn't include the hoop. For about $8, I could have gotten a similar size project that also included the hoop. They didn't used to sell the hoops project, a trend in that right now. This is one that I got at Hobby Lobby. It's a little pineapple. It actually comes with the frame to frame it in when you get done. I bought this because it's such a great example of a beginner project. I paid, I think you can see, $1.99 for this. And so, again, everything that I need to include pattern is package. It doesn't include a hoop and it doesn't include scissors. But otherwise, I have everything I need to make it. This is another one. I love pineapples. This is an example of pineapple. This one does come with a hoop. This is my favorite kind of hoop, this wooden hoop with the screw closure on it. I like that the best. Anyway, those are some examples of prepackaged kits if you want to start that way, or you can pick out your pattern and pick out your threads yourself. All right. Well, I'd like to thank you for being here today. If you want to share your experience, you can do that with a hashtag or an @sign. Also, you can email Liz directly. She loves to talk to our learners. Her email address is liz@getsetup.io. You can tell her what you like. You can tell her if something's bothering you. You can also share with Liz ideas that you might have for other classes. You'll see over here on the right are some related classes. There's a Boredom Busters class, which is a lot of fun. Introduction to Calligraphy is on the schedule soon. There's a class on designing your own t-shirts and sweatshirts. My next, I've got some Learn to Crochet and Knit, and I'm in the process of developing intermediate classes for crocheting, knitting, and cross stitching. Now, after the class is over, if you've been part of the class with me today, you'll be getting some class notes from me. In those class notes, if you scroll down and you see this orange button, you can click on the orange button and you can give me some direct feedback. This will pop up if you do that. You can rate the session stars, me with stars. You can write comments in here. You can write comments in here, although you don't need to. And you can also write some general comments in here or suggest classes in this area right here. And then when you hit done, the feedback goes to my box and I read every word of feedback that I get. So I love to hear from my learners so that I know what I can do to make your experience better than what it currently is. Know that the Get Set Up community is growing. We're very excited about that. Spread the word about your learning with Get Set Up. You can even come and host an interest group. If you're interested in that, please let us know. If you want to, you can suggest a class that you'd like to see. We're always developing new classes. We do partner with different organizations such as assisted care, senior living, government and community organizations. If you let us know about yours, someone at Get Set Up would be happy to reach out to them. And remember, if you've been with me in the class, you can request a recording of this, and you can tell Liz about your ideas by emailing help@getsetup.io. If you need some help booking your next class, or if you'd like to see a little bit more about using the website, you stay online with me and I'd be happy to show you that. I want to thank you for being here with me today. I've really enjoyed this opportunity to share my love of County Cross Stitch. I would love to hear from you. So please feel free to let me know what you might be to Get Set Up. Now, if you give me just a minute, we probably have time to hop on over to the Get Set Up website. I'm going to take you to my own homepage. It takes me just a minute. I have to, sometimes I don't quite know why, but sometimes I have to log in. Sometimes it takes me right to my spot, and it is taking me right to my spot today. So I'm going to share my screen again so that you can see. This is my my website as a learner. This is my Get Set Up website as a learner. Log my name up here. And you can see that I've taken 47 classes, and that's been since the middle of January. I've really enjoyed the Get Set Up classes, and I've actually learned a lot as a learner as well as now being a guide. What I want to show you is there's a couple of really neat features that not everyone has noticed yet. So if you have a guide that you really love, so you're maybe interested in maybe some more classes that I teach, you just put my first name in here. And so far, I'm the only Sarah that's a guide right now. So you only have to know my first name. And you all classes each that are scheduled pop up right there. And you can click on those and find out more information about my classes. So that's one neat way if you've got a guide that you've enjoyed learning from. Or let's say that you're interested in, let's say you're interested in photography. So I'm going to put in the word photos, and all the classes that Get Set Up offers that have to do with photos pop up in there, and you can click on any one of those and get more information on booking class. It's real neat to know. The other feature that I absolutely love is I like to click on this classes button. And I don't know about you, but I love series. If I have learned one thing in a series, or if I learn one thing and I have an interest in it, I might like to know what else is offered in that same series. And so if you click on your classes button on the left and you go over here to the right and you click on the word series over here on the right, anything that's taught in a series pops up on this page. And so, for example, if you are you love cooking and you want to know, are there other classes? What are the classes that Get Set Up offers on cooking? You can see that that is a series that has 11 classes in it. And you click on that button for the 11 classes, and it's going to bring this up. And you can see all 11 classes and book right from the spot anything that we currently offer on cooking. So I love that feature a lot. So that being said, I would like to say I really appreciate you being with me today. I've enjoyed spending this time with you. I hope you've learned something about County Cross Stitch, and I hope to see you again